Anyway, let's just kick off.
Yeah, sure thing.
Cool. So welcome to Green Drinks. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Small but keen crew. I'll begin today's presentation with an acknowledgement of country. Ballarat stands on the traditional lands of the Wathaurong and Dja Dja Wurrung peoples. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Wathaurong and Dja Dja Wurrung people, traditional custodians of the land on which I'm coming from to you today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Tonight's guest is Fahimah Badul Hisham. Fahimah will be speaking on why she got involved in climate activism and why she chose Australian religious response to climate change as her activism home. She'll also be discussing the role that people of faith can play to broaden and deepen the climate justice movement and the opportunities coming up with Sacred People, Sacred Earth, the global multi-faith year of climate action. The title of tonight's talk is Faith and Climate Action, Faces of the Future. So I'll introduce Fahimah in a second, but I'll first just do some quick housekeeping. So I'm your MC tonight. My name's Tony. I'm on the board of Breeze, and the event is being put on by Breeze and Green Drinks. Green Drinks has been running for 7 years now. It's a non-partisan space for environmental related talks in Ballarat every month. The name comes from an international movement. You don't need to drink or be in the greens to come along. There'll be an opportunity for questions after Fahimah's talk, so please put them in the comments as we go. And the talk is being recorded for Breeze's YouTube channel later. So about Fahimah, I met Fahimah at a training session called the Community Organising Fellowship, which is participants from all around Australia. I was taken by her compelling story and thought straight away it'd be great for Ballarat Green Drinks. So thank you so much for coming along. Fahimah lives by the sea in Maroubra in Bidjigal Country. She is an architect, a climate change campaigner, a feminist and a Muslim. She is a director of Fahimah Designs, an architecture practice that specialises in energy efficient low carbon buildings. She's the co-president of Muslim Collective, a diverse and inclusive community for progressive thought and social action. She is also a committee member and the Sydney convener for the Australian Religious Response to Climate Change. She believes in intersectional approach is crucial for climate justice, and ARRCC's multi-faith angle is important to increase the participation of migrant communities, moderates and faith communities in creating the politics and economics of a low carbon future. How do you have time for all that? That's my question. Please welcome Fahimah, who joins us during Ramadan and Islamic Holy Month with a virtual round of applause. So happy Ramadan to you and our attendees. Take it away, Fahimah.
Cool. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so I've been fasting today, so apologies if my brain is sort of like a bit slow in kind of like firing off the neurons or whatever. I've got tea, so I'm not going to die. But yeah, it's kind of tough physically, Ramadan, so bear with me. I've got slides, so I'll share my screen. Ooh, what can I do here? We can share. Okay. Can everybody see that?
Perfect.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so welcome to my TED Talk. Yeah, so I'm thinking about this idea of like what the future of like a low carbon Australia could be, and what is the role of somebody like me who is a person of faith and a migrant can play, and how that intersects with other sort of social justice movements, especially as it relates to kind of justice for Indigenous Australians. Yeah, so I'll start as well by acknowledging country. So in the Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, which means in the name of God, the most gracious and most merciful. I acknowledge that wherever we are in Australia, we live, work, and campaign on stolen land, and that sovereignty was never ceded. I live in Maroubra, which is the home of the Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation. And I love this little fact that in their language, the name Maroubra means like thunder, which is the sound that the waves make when they crash on the shore. And I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and I stand in solidarity with their young warriors and leaders. So here's a question for you all to think about. What role can an immigrant play, especially a Muslim migrant with their own privileges and challenges, to effectively contribute to decolonizing the settler colony that is Australia? No rush, something to mull over. But if you've got kind of like excellent suggestions, chuck it in the chat. I'd love to, yeah, hear what you think. So this is a tradition that we have at ARRC. So to honor like our various faith and spiritual sort of beliefs, we usually begin a meeting with a minute of silence. So we can take this moment to take a deep breath and just sort of center ourselves, if you will. Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. So I'll introduce myself properly. My name is Fahimah, and here are some of my several hats / hijabs. So how I make my money, as Tony says, I am an architect, and Fahimah Designs is my little design practice. And how I keep my sanity and not fall apart is by working towards, I guess, justice and kind of the causes that I care about. So one of them is ARRCC, which is the Australian Religious Response to Climate Change. And the other one is the Muslim Collective, which is a small group that is inclusive, that aims to be inclusive and kind of like using Islamic traditions of reason and compassion to push for a more progressive society. But I'm aware that in this day and age, kind of like everybody has so many hats on and so many hustles, and it can create like a toxic environment where people put unnecessary pressure on themselves. So my PSA is don't get sucked into martyrdom. Like I contribute my energy to these things, but ultimately I just like to hang with my husband and our cat. So kind of like, yeah, know when to draw your boundaries and make sure you look after yourself as well, because ultimately burnout is not good. And yeah, just be gentle to yourself. So this is my origin story that sort of Tony alluded to. I'll just pause the sharing for a second because I'm going to read it. Okay. Whoops. So last time I told this story, it got quite emotional. So I'll just sort of like, hopefully I'll do better this time. Okay, so here we go. when I was 9 years old, my mom went into my room and kind of like, with no context, no preamble, she asked me if I wanted to wear the hijab. And most women in my family cover their hair. So it was kind of like the done thing. I didn't think too much of it. So I said yes, and I could see how happy that made my mom. Um, and I was like, okay, cool, I'm making the right decision. So then I wore a headscarf for the first time the next day. But I felt kind of like weirdly sexualized, even though kind of like I was 9 and I had no concept of what that means. Um, and then kind of growing up, like, because you know how I guess the patriarchy works in insidious ways. Um, I was told that the hijab protects you from the impure thoughts of men and also your own. Fast forward to in my early 20s, I came to Australia to study architecture. So I was spending my time between Australia and Malaysia, where I grew up. I was still wearing the hijab, but it was I experienced like this quite contrasting sort of reactions to like a piece of cloth on my head. I got shouted at by bogans in Brisbane, but I also got catcalled on the streets of Kuala Lumpur. Um, I got an internship at like this prestigious architecture firm in KL, and I was like, yeah, kind of, being a badass. Um, I wore kind of like these chunky ankle high boots to work because I thought if I were ever to get harassed, I can kick somebody in the nuts, and that would be more painful than just wearing flats. Um, but there was this middle-aged uncle kind of like colleague who sort of like looked at me up and down. I said, damn girl, those are fuck me boots. I was like, not the response I intended at all. And then also at the same time, this my English teacher from high school, like we were friends on Facebook. He started kind of like commenting kind of excessively on my photos. Like every single thing that I posted, like I get a comment from him straight away. And then eventually he sort of like slid into my DMs with these like overly friendly messages, and kind of like just sort of started to feel really creepy and inappropriate. And like his profile photo was of him cuddling his 2 children. So I was like, not sure what the message here is, but this doesn't feel right. Um, and then, like in Australia, I got to know like this very sexy man, and we decided to meet up in Melbourne. Um, so we were both in relationships at the time, and I wore a hijab to our date, thinking that it would sort of send some kind of message to him and also keep my own feelings in check. But long story short, I went home with him that night, and he is now my husband. Um, so then, kind of in my late 20s, I slowly came to believe that the hijab doesn't protect anyone from anything. I kind of realized that I am a sexual person, I have my own desires, and gendered harassment is really out of my control. Um, my friend at the time also decided to stop wearing the hijab, so we sort of kind of like did it together. Um, and we also realized that this is not something that we can do when we're with our families, because it goes against their strongly held beliefs. So I wear the hijab when I'm hanging out with my family. Um, So, I'm not what most would consider to be a good Muslim, but I'll elaborate on this as we go on. But yeah, like most people, my heart was broken when kind of over 2 years ago, the Australian-born terrorists massacred peaceful worshippers at 2 mosques in Christchurch. So my greatest source of faith and comfort at that time was my headscarf and other Muslim women trying to put the community back together, trying to grieve and make sense and search for justice. So I joined the climate movement shortly after because I hoped that Islamophobia cannot thrive in a hopeful movement that seeks justice for everything and everyone. So through this experience, I consider my work on the climate as a form of worship. And sometimes I wear the hijab, sometimes I don't, but often I do when I'm doing something for that's related to the climate. So that way I kind of ground myself in my work that I'm doing this for God. It's literally the threads that connects me to them. Yeah. So that's my little story. I'll go back to sharing my screen. Does that make sense to people? Present.
Perfect.
Okay, cool. All right, so I'll start with architecture, which is kind of like, I guess, the craft or skill that I've cultivated the longest, if you will. Like, it's the reason why I came to Australia, right? So I've been doing architecture for about 6 years now. Yeah, and it's mostly kind of like these funky, beautiful, contemporary single residences that looks amazing on Instagram. And yeah, so go to fahimah.com if you like houses. I've got pictures of my work. I've got sketches and drawings. And yeah, hit me up if you want a cool, sustainable house design. Hashtag shameless plug. But yeah, this is kind of like my favorite house that I've designed so far is for a train engineer. So like there's a room that we designed for his model train. So if you like see that little slot window at the top, you can see like his train moving past. So like the idea is that you could sit down in the living room, have a cup of tea, and like watch the trains go around. And yeah, so that is like a 2-story sandstone wall that's made from like reclaimed sandstone foundations in the like old part of the house that we had to demolish. And then we riffed off that like train sort of design by using kind of like these twisted steel staircases. Yeah, I love technical drawing, so I love sort of like working out design on papers and kind of really visualizing how it can come together and so that it sort of like conforms to code and the engineering makes sense and stuff like that. Yeah, this was a really, really fun project. It's another one of my work. And yeah, so we've got like this big butterfly roof, and like we zoned the living room at the back to like living room, kitchen, study, and dining. So like the spaces kind of like are just like compact and kind of lots of light coming through. Yeah, and we've got kind of like these giant fans at the top to sort of circulate air around, so they're reversible as well, so you can sort of switch it to summer mode and winter mode, and like big eaves to protect the windows from heat gain. So this is what I call paper architecture, or how to lose a design competition. So when I was working at my old job, I also volunteered with this little crew called Architecture for Humanity. And we decided to go for this little design competition, which is the brief was to reimagine ecotourism, I suppose. And some of us were kind of like Stop Adani activists. So we thought, what can we do? How can we present an alternative to mining via tourism? So we proposed this little project where you took a train from Abbott Point, which is like the coal loading port, all the way through like back Queensland to Mount Isa. And the train is has like all these compartments that you know, where you can learn about Australian history and its, you know, relationship with kind of traditional owners, and kind of like, you know, you can chill and sort of like learn, yeah, just learn about the landscape as you're passing through it. And um, so we call it trace elements because we're sort of like exploring all the minerals that is kind of like in the ground in Australia that like we mustn't touch, but kind of like just appreciate remotely. And then yeah, so the idea is that like you explore, because it's a big journey as well. So you explore Australia through its kind of landscape and topography and kind of like mineral resources, and also kind of like the transition between day and night. It's all very theoretical. It was never going to go anywhere, but I loved it because yeah, it's like this cute little idea about an alternative to mining that we're all sort of like grappling with one way or another. We didn't win, of course. Um, Yeah. So, and moving on to ARRC. So, ARRC is a national multi-faith climate advocacy group. Um, and yeah, I just felt like, I guess with what I was going through when I was sort of like recovering from the Christchurch attacks, I felt like, well, this is something that is the direct opposite to this horrible thing that had happened. And you know, the people were accepting and they weren't judgmental, and they just sort of like um, had like this clarity about where they want their faith to go. um, and so so why ARC exists at all is to give voice to kind of like the more moderate, like the so-called quiet Australians, and bringing them into the conversation, into the climate conversation. And a lot of these sort of like faith communities, and I'll say that ARC is mostly kind of like older white Christians. So a lot a lot of them have either have connections or are in like coalition seats. So there's definitely like a really good overlap um, with kind of like conservative Australians, and sort of like engaging them in that way would sort of present climate um, from a different perspective. And it's not just the usual suspects of like, you know, the inner city greenie, so whatever it is that people are so terrified by. Um, and the thing that I love as well about ARC is that there is plurality in our ethical framework that's derived from scripture. Um, and we kind of like, you know, talk in iterations of it, but we always find that these different frameworks are very complementary in the way that, you know, we craft our strategy. And I've sort of like set in a lot of like a few multi-faith dialogues and things like that. And it's just awesome to me that we actually have a concrete plan to kind of like achieve, you know, what our campaign objectives are. Um, and the other thing that we've been thinking about quite a lot recently is how, what the role of um, faith and stories are in like helping shift the narrative around the climate crisis. And we always push kind of like our activism as like a moral imperative to preserve and care for creation. So um, the Abrahamic religions have this idea of stewardship of the environment, whereas the Buddhists, um, for example, see themselves as being kind of like part of creation. So, um, and I think it's important to bring up as many stories as possible so that people can see themselves within kind of like the climate movement. Um, so, and I guess like with ARC, we've got like two main streams of work. So we work on individual change, and we also work on the structural change. Um, so with the individual change, we've got a program called Living the Change. And this is sort of like aimed towards kind of like grounding your own activism in things that you firmly like have faith in. So for example, we had a series of like helping people transition to a plant-based diet, and a lot of it sort of like there's many reasons to sort of like work on yourself first before you work to change others. And you know, you have to, I guess, walk the talk and not be a hypocrite, I guess. um, and then we also have kind of like something that's broader, which is sort of our divestment campaign. And this sort of like is promoting this, yeah, either individual people of faith or faith groups and churches to, you know, divest their finances from companies that still deal with fossil fuels. Um, and it's pretty exciting to me that like churches are kind of, you know, choosing super funds that that do not invest in fossil fuels and pushes sustainably responsible investments. Yeah, so that's exciting. And then we also do the classic meet your MPs kind of thing. The picture on the right is the ARC crew in Cairns, who met with Warren Ench, and they've got a good relationship with Warren, I believe. And then the picture on the right is our little stunt outside of some Labour MP offices. This is sort of in the lead up to the last election, where kind of a lot of people thought Labour would win. So we thought it, you know, like push them to come up with stronger climate policies. Didn't happen, of course. But yeah, I quite like this idea. Like, you know, we sort of marched down the street carrying this fake coffin and like delivered a eulogy for coal outside of MP's offices. So that was fun. Um, and then we also do stuff like, you know, submissions to various, you know, anti-fossil fuel projects. So a few of us went and spoke at the IPCC against the Maroubra gas project, and we submitted like this epic sort of objection letter to them as well. Again, that didn't go anywhere because Santos has money. And then because we're quite a small organization, we do a lot of collaborations with the wider climate movement. So we are closely involved with the Stop Adani movement. So we kind of organize riding parties to participate in their tactics to get Adani insurers to one by one drop Adani. So that was quite popular. And the cool thing is, because everybody had to pivot to digital activism, a lot of our constituents are older people. So everybody had to skill up quite quickly to use Zoom, to use Twitter and LinkedIn. And that was empowering for them. Like, it's something that they've always felt quite worried or like not confident about, but kind of like just having to do it and having like a really powerful goal to work towards, help people learn quite quickly. So that was fantastic. Okay, so there's this video. ARRC is also involved as a founding partner in Green Faith International, which is like a coalition of 14 organizations from like all over the world. And we recently launched a year of action called Sacred People, Sacred Earth. And for this year, our target is to get fossil fuel executives out of the COP26 negotiations, and to exert some pressure to sort of our governments to bring stronger emissions reduction target to the COP. I'll just show you that little video that we've got. Um, whoops, sorry. Oops. Yeah. Yeah, so that was just like a supercut of these um, just actions all over the world that happened on the 11th of March. Um, yeah, it was, I loved that video so much, especially kind of like, you know, all the young people and people dancing, just sort of like this joyous, really joyous expression of faith. Um, and yeah, I'd love to see more of that happening in Australia. Um, Okay, so yeah, so Muslim Collective is the other thing that I care deeply about. So I mentioned in my story that a lot of people wouldn't consider myself a good Muslim, and that's because I'm not particularly pious or kind of, um, I guess, conservative in the way that a lot of Muslims might think. So then I kind of like found Muslim Collective on Meetup, and I was like, yes, this is my crew. Finally, it's happened. Um, and yeah, we went to like a cafe and talked about kind of forming this collective that's based on progressive values and inclusion. So one of our sister organizations is the Sydney Queer Muslims. So we were supporting them through the marriage equality plebiscite. Um, and yeah, so we're sort of, I guess, aiming to be a community or a safe space for anybody who's ever felt outlawed or discriminated against or unwelcome in kind of more mainstream spaces. Um, One of the kind of campaigns that we did was this photo exhibition called hashtag Ways to be Muslim. So we just got a ton of like street photos of people just living their authentic lives, and expressing the way that they're Muslim in any way that they see fit. Um, yeah, that was like a really beautiful campaign. Um, and then we also have our monthly discussion circles. So I guess it goes through like just a lot of topics. Like we all pick one thing to discuss. So, and then we just sort of come together and talk about it. And so one of the more recent ones is a talk about like why be progressive at all. And this sort of scholar in Queensland was sort of he had sort of interpretations of scripture and philosophies on why progressivism is actually at the heart of the indigenous like Muslim movement. Um, and then recently we had an eco Ramadan discussion circle on like the impact of industrial food production and fishery, and how that affects the climate, environment, and also the horrifying human rights abuses in these industrialized systems. And then so, quite often we have poetry discussions, or literature, or music. So it's sort of like I guess it's nice to sort of explore progressive thoughts from many different sort of perspectives and sort of sources. So yeah, I really appreciate being able to expand my mind through all these kind of like channels, in like a very, I guess, welcoming environment. I mean, we kind of like tend to end up talking about capitalism and colonization, because yeah, go figure. But no, it's been really, really cool. Um, so, takeaway ideas, I guess, like the way I see it, the world is messed up, and the problems that we have to solve are very complex. I kind of visualize it as like a beast with many tentacles, and I think therefore by definition, we do need solutions that are diverse and inclusive so that we can tackle these problems, from many, 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 many different angles. Um, and most of us wear multiple hats, and yeah, where is the time? and I think these hats can be engineered in some way for social justice, and everybody has something to contribute, which is why I kind of like I'm trying to hone my architecture practice looking at kind of climate resilient and sustainable buildings and cities, and then um, and kind of like my climate work to be as inclusive as possible. Um, but you don't need to be a lone wolf or a hero. There's a tribe out there for you, and I'm sure, yeah, you can find your tribe, and yeah, find your home where you can thrive and contribute to make the world a better place. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Fahimah. So virtual round of applause, everyone. Thank you. That was so good. I really want to join Muslim Collective myself.
You,
Muslim. Is that okay?
Yeah, you're most welcome. We actually have a few non-Muslims who rock up, and like people who are new Muslims, and sometimes there's a lot of, I guess, yeah, some people might feel a bit isolated when they join Islam, when they're new to the religion, and kind of like not knowing who to turn to. And yeah, it's um it's a delicate situation, and I think Muslim Collective um, aims to be like a group of people that kind of supports like these people who are in like more vulnerable situations in their lives.
Fantastic. I grew up a Baha'i, and I wish there was a similar organisation when I was growing up.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I really liked the beginning when it was the silence. I really appreciate that. It's a great way to start.
Yeah. I was like kind of worried. Is this silence too awkward?
Last week I stayed in Sydney, and I stayed at the Quaker Centre there, and they have a service where it's silence for a certain period of time, and people get up and say something if they feel compelled, and people can say anything. So it's a great experience. Silence can be very powerful. Your train idea, it might be picked up later on when the train's not used for coal. So
Yeah,
it's not
exactly. How awesome would it be? I should copyright this idea and hopefully cash it in.
definitely. So that idea is not dead yet.
Mm,
For architecture, I was just thinking Ballarat, it's a very cold place. So that's something that a lot of buildings here don't do very well, is keep in heat and
yeah.
are livable. Even still, the new houses, they leak heat.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah, for sure.
I've
I
got it.
think like it's bizarre to me that um we're not building better houses, because basically to build houses that are comfortable and climatically appropriate, it doesn't take much. It takes like just very simple first principles, and you can apply that to any kind of design. Like it doesn't need to look like a sexy vogue living kind of piece of architecture for it to be sustainable and comfortable. um but yeah, I don't understand why that's not like, because it's such common sense to me. But yeah, we definitely need to make this kind of the standard. Like thermal comfort needs to be a standard.
Mm. And I've got one question with ARC. I was wondering if you could, do you know the history of how it started in Australia?
Yeah, I think so. ARC has been around for about 13 years, and so Thea Ormerod is our president, and she's Catholic. And in her church, I think she was surrounded by a lot of climate denialists, and she was sort of getting so frustrated by it, and she's like, "Sod it, I'll you know form ARC and kind of like find people from other denominations and other religions to sort of coalesce like a faith voice, to so that people aren't alone." And yeah, so I think that's the story of ARC. But yeah, and we sort of like keep expanding bit by bit. Yeah.
That's
um,
great.
what's
Mike, Michael just put a comment. Michael, do you want me to put you on? Do you want to say that question yourself and have a little chat? Yes, awesome.
Come on through, Michael. Oh, he left.
No, here he is.
Oh, he's part of the fan list now. Okay, got it.
So
Yeah.
you'll just have to.
Can I unmute yourself and turn on your video?
You can't see me. That's probably a good thing, though.
Why?
Oh, there I am.
Oh, hello.
Yep, there we are. Hello, everybody. Yeah, the question was, now with all that I've forgotten. I was just asking, you've shown a whole lot of good things, Fahimah. I was just wondering if you got any advice on something we could do locally here in Ballarat.
Oh, there's so many things to
Thanks,
do.
Michael.
Like
Give us 3 or 4.
3 or 4. Goodness gracious me. Divest. Get all your money away from the corporations. I think this is a good opportunity as well to kind of like tell your banks to get their act together, because like the divestment movement has definitely gained momentum. So kind of like more and more voices are needed to that. And I think just yeah, be active, like participate in kind of local government. You know, if somebody's got like an interesting initiative like solar or kind of community garden or composting or anything that brings the community together for conservation is is useful. And it's not just kind of like the end result of what you're doing, but kind of like coalescing kind of like, you know, powerful environmental voices and social justice voices is, yeah, is super duper important.
A bit like cultural change. Gradually, you sow a few seeds in people's minds and hearts, and
Yeah, yeah,
gradually.
exactly. Yeah, and I think, yeah, there's something really powerful about sharing stories as well. You know, not in kind of like a stand up on a soapbox kind of thing, but having conversations to sort of, like, I think the science is out there, and that should be enough to plant the seeds in people's minds. But I think it has to go from thought to faith, I think. So I kind of very much see climate action for me as like an act of faith, and that is sort of like, it's a combination from like intellectual acceptance of the fact and conviction that you have to do something about it, and that conviction, I think, comes from conversations. And like I guess you can, you know, role model change, or you can sort of um, yeah, slowly sort of talk to people and making them, yeah, just helping people like reach that aha moment, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
And
It's interesting that you said start with the head and move to the heart. I always thought that too, but Bernie Holland from Caritas, which is a Catholic aid organisation, was urging me to start with the heart, then move to the head. But to me, it always seems to start with the head first. So yeah.
I think that's what kind of like the living the change, or like this individual change programs try to do, is sort of like to make sure that your heart is in the right place before you sort of externalize kind of like the work that you want to do. Yeah, but maybe it's more useful to think about it as a self-reinforcing cycle.
Yeah. Thank you.
Michael, before you go, do you have any insight into the Catholic Church here divesting? Because I heard that they were in the process of doing that.
I certainly hope so. I've heard stories about it. I don't know the details. The Catholic Super Fund, which is one of the big super funds in Australia, industry funds, they've put out a statement saying that it's sort of worded in a way that makes you think they may be still investing in fossil fuels, but they say we look to the future. We consider the future impacts, which sort of implies that they are divesting, but doesn't exactly say it. Yeah.
I think like with any objectives, it needs to be time bound. So that's the question you have to put to them, like when is this future you talk about?
Yeah.
Anyone else like to ask any questions? Sally, Pat, Madonna, Oliver, Liz, and Gemma. I know some amazing people who are attending. And while people are thinking, Pat, why are we so few though? I think there's multiple events clashing tonight. Apologies for that.
There's no actual alcohol at this one. That's the problem.
Yeah, there's no alcohol at this event. That's the problem. Next time, actually saying that, next time will probably be a live event. So
Pat's got a question.
Pat's got a question. Come on in.
Yes, now.
Hey.
Sorry, Pat. Unmute you there. Yep. Should be right now.
Okay. I didn't mean why are we so few tonight. I meant why are we so few campaigning it? And in a city the size of Ballarat, we all know each other by first name. There's only less than a dozen of us actively involved. And you're unusual because you're a professional. We see very few professional people stepping up to do any activism with us. tiny numbers.
Mm.
Have you reflected on that? Why are we so few? Why are there so few
Yeah.
climate activists?
Yeah. I think that's the biggest question that I had when I joined the climate movement. I was like, where are the Muslims at kind of like these big climate protests? So, and part of the reason why I joined ARC is so that I could be that person, and hopefully, if somebody sees me and think, oh, I relate to her, and this isn't something so foreign or weird. So yeah, so my thing is to like, I tend to turn up to places where people don't expect me to, so that like I hope that it kind of normalizes activism in a way, because like part of the thing that ARC is interested in is like not being the usual suspects that kind of like go on about climate change.
Yes, yeah.
So I think it's useful in that sense. And I don't know, like you know your community better. Um, yeah, so yeah, I don't have an answer for you why Ballarat is not chock full of climate activists.
Thanks, Pat. I'll go to Liz, who's panelist. Can you unmute yourself, Liz?
Okay, yeah, thanks for a fascinating talk. One thing I was just wondering about is that, it's been in the news today that America and Australia are finally, after 20 years, pulling out of Afghanistan. And, I've seen some coverage about the Taliban, what's next for them and so forth. And I remember seeing a while back that at one stage the Taliban put out a directive banning plastic bags, and because they understood the environmental impact of plastic bags, which I found quite amazing that they had that they were taking that idea on. But I was just wondering, what potential do you think there is for Afghanistan to have a sort of a fresh start and a green start as part of a sort of a rebuild and like a healing, that in some respects that healing the earth is part of the healing in a post-war context?
Yeah. Wow, what a question. It's yeah. So I asked Dr. Daud Bachelor, who is like a Muslim scholar in Brisbane, like, yeah, where are the Muslims in the climate movement? And one of he basically gave three reasons, right? So a lot of Muslim majority countries are kind of like former colonies, former European colonies of some sort, and then after the fall of the Iron Curtain, a lot of Muslim countries were trying to dodge America's guns. So there's definitely kind of more pressing security issues at play for some countries. And then the other thing is that, when people leave their home countries because of, war and famine and other insecurities, they move to, so-called Western countries, and their aim is security, and the aspirations is this very consumerist middle class kind of image. Um, so I'm interested in this idea of like the new green middle class for Muslim countries, and that definitely requires like a new narrative, a new vision, education for women and girls. Um, and yeah, so part of like the Green Faith Year of Action sort of is looking at this, like, I guess it's sort of like a bigger kind of, I guess you can think about it in way of like climate reparations, where wealthy countries contribute more to the UN's green climate funds, and sort of respecting indigenous rights for self-determination, and providing helping kind of like developing countries access renewable energy. So I think all of this has to come together, so that I guess developing nations aren't left behind in kind of like a decarbonized world. So it's, yeah, it is a global effort, I think, and that has to be underpinned by kind of community empowerment.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for the question, Liz. You guys could probably talk offline more as well if you want to keep going. But I've got two really good questions. One by Olivia. She asks, I wonder on the tips to make groups more intersectional.
Yeah, that's a cool question. And I think the thing to start off with is to definitely assume that, you know, people might have needs or basically needs that they like to be addressed. So like one thing Tony and I learned at the fellowship is to establish norms. So when you sort of like have your group sort of like have a frank conversation about, you know, what would help each other thrive in this environment, so that people can speak freely and like be their authentic selves without, you know, and how to disagree. That's kind of like an important thing, you know, like having respect. And I think the other thing to acknowledge as well is that like we all have our blind spots, and so when somebody kind of like pulls you up on your blind spot, you know, like don't get defensive straight away, or like, you know, I understand that like they're trying to teach so that we can all kind of like be lifted up together. And yeah, I think that's probably like a good principle to go with, just to sort of ask everybody what they need, and just have the intention to be respectful and to learn. Especially like I've got major blind spots myself, and I'm trying to learn more about everybody, and kind of like and my aim is that like where I can, you know, I want everybody to have like a good life, and everybody should be able to thrive and be safe and happy.
Thanks, Fahimah. Last question. Can you tell us more about how thermal comfort could be a standard? Can this be achieved through local government legislation? And so Sally's really interested in like how to have that structural change, because, you know, housing is such a big, you know, energy user.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I guess it's quite challenging. Well, I guess you can look at it from kind of like if you're designing a new township, for example, you can design the entire township based on passive solar design and correct solar orientation, providing breezeways, and like natural, providing heat in winter and excluding heat in summer. But then, you know, the problem is our cities are built in just whack on a grid over farmland and then be done with it. So kind of retrofitting it can be more challenging. So that's when you do just basic stuff like making sure windows like and doors and, you know, like areas of glass is protected in summer and lets in enough light in winter. And then you can, I'm kind of really excited about hemp. Like I am pro cannabis reform because I like hemp, and, you know, there's like new emerging technologies that we can sort of experiment with. And hempcrete, for example, makes a super comfortable kind of home. Like it's a great insulator, and it's also great for like sound absorption. So I used to live under the flight path in Maroubra, and I helped a friend renovate her house with hempcrete. And when everything was done, we couldn't hear the jet planes flying over her house. And it was just like this astounding thing that's like, it's just hemp, it's a weed. And yeah, so I think there's like untapped potential there for kind of like creating a new industry that helps us achieve, our kind of like safe and healthy houses, and also generating, income for the local economy where, hemp is grown locally, for example. But yeah, that's such a big question. We can chat more about that for sure.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for your time today, Fahimah. It's a really awesome presentation.
Thanks for having me.
You're doing so many things. I don't know how you've got time. And thank you for all the attendees coming and the great questions. That was awesome. I'll post that video that Fahimah played on the Green Drinks Facebook page. The next Green Drinks, I've reached out to the School Strike for Climate, who are doing actions next month. And so we might hear a bit about why they're doing that and the history and other things. So thank you for coming, and one round of applause for Fahimah for coming. Thank you, everyone, and yourself. Awesome.
Thanks for organizing, Tony. That's
all
so
good. Easy for me.
Because like lots of you had really awesome questions, so if you want to have like a deeper conversation about it, feel free to reach out at fahimah@arrcc.org.au.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Mm.
Okay.
All right, have a good one, everybody.
Have a good night.
Bye.